A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey, Herman and Corn. So we have chatted before about the digital preparedness one can do for challenging situations like the one that we are living here in at the moment in Israel, with the war going on between Israel, Iran, and the US. And last summer, it was a bit of a crazy 12-day period. Was the first war. We had two strikes before that, and over the course of these wars with Iran, I've been determined to take some lessons from each, so that when the next round happens, because that's my maybe pessimistic preparedness posture here, is that I do really hope that this is the last conflict with Iran, but we can't really bank on that, or there not being more geopolitical conflicts at some point in the future, because certainly over the course of the past few years between the Houthis and Iran on October the 7th, there's been a lot of wars here in Israel, and each one hits at a time where this one is a bit of an exception. Actually, there was a long prelude to it, but even when there is that prelude and you feel you're very prepared or you've done your prepping, inevitably it's only when it actually happens that you say, wait, next time I need this or that. So as much as I try not to obsess over this, I like the philosophy of Kaizen, the Japanese idea of continuous improvement, that between these chaotic periods, when you have a bit of time to think, hey, that would have been really useful, you can upgrade your gear in order to be better equipped for the next eventuality. So I'd love to talk today about one of the essentials in my prepping pack, or one of the things I found, I think, the most valuable probably of all, and that is a power bank. So we did one about power stations, which are these kind of big and bulky, kind of the step up from a power bank. But I thought it would be worth doing one specifically about power banks for preparedness, for the following reason. A power station, because it's big and bulky, is kind of not what you're going to pack in. If you're evacuating and you had enough time to fill up a car or a Pelican bag, you might roll one in. But if it were an urban survival type situation where you were going into shelter in an urban environment for a while, and you have to run to there, which is how all the Iranian wars have started here, with people literally scrambling for shelter, you're definitely not going to grab for a big bulky battery. So the power bank form factor is a lot more friendly. Now, the distinction between a power bank and a power station is a little blurry, I think, but it's essentially one, I guess, of capacity and use case, in the sense that a power station is often helpful for camping. So that's very much not it's a good reason to have one if you do a lot of camping, but it's not really designed optimally for what you might want in a more survival situation, where what can fit in a backpack or in a small carry-on piece of luggage is at the most is probably going to be the kind of form factor you're targeting. So I have and this is also, I think, one of those technology products that's very, very confusing to try to get a sense for what's good and what isn't, because there's so many ridiculous claims by manufacturers that just don't make any sense. The one I have currently, I'm just looking at it here, is a Baseus. It's 145 watts, so that means it can power a laptop. It has enough output, but that's not the capacity. The capacity is listed as 5200 milliampere hours, and it says here 14.8 volts, 77 kilowatt hours, cell 260 milliampere hours times 8. That feels a bit off to me. That doesn't really make sense. What's the overall capacity? Herman and Corn, maybe you can explain exactly what's going on there. But this is one of those ones you'll see on websites like AliExpress or high street tech stores, and this was about, I think, 60 $60, which is what a kind of halfway decent one will get you. But maybe it's my imagination, but I feel like 5200 milliampere hours sounds like an awful lot, but doesn't actually get you all that far if you begin using it to charge up your phone, sometimes even charging up a smaller power bank from it, or charging up a head torch between uses. So I'd love to get Herman and Corin some thoughts on what is a good capacity for this use that wouldn't be incredibly bulky. And I just want to say as well that one of the limiting factors here is you can only bring up to a certain size on airplanes. I think it's 10,000 milliampere hours. And you also have sometimes challenges in importing a certain capacity of these from the internet because of restrictions over lithium ion purchasing. So power banks that you can bring on your holiday or vacation is not quite the same thing as the biggest power bank you can comfortably carry in a backpack you might want for survival. And you might be able to source that one locally, or you might have to. So I'd like to focus our conversation specifically on that latter category. So what would you recommend, Herman and Corin, among supplier or among quality brands, realistic capacities and models and different form factors? Because I feel like there's an awful lot of products in the power bank market that make these impossible claims about their actual capacity. And you know that I'm always looking for gear that's rugged and durable. And I think that for Type C outputs, that is the way to go. And we want to be able to charge this thing up quickly between uses as well through a high-speed Type C input. So with all those factors considered, Herman and Corin, if you were looking for a few or a good quality investment power bank, this isn't something just you're going to put in your wallet and maybe hope it charges up your phone once. If you wanted to buy something that is going to be a good, durable, high quality power bank that's going to take a charge, hold it for a fairly reliable amount of time, and when push comes to shove, you can put it in a backpack or a piece of luggage and keep a number of things going, including other power banks. And I want to ask you a dumb but necessary question about that. If you are chaining power banks or using one to charge another, some of them do support pass-through. So can you actually charge up like 3 by just daisy chaining the inputs and outputs if the type support it? And is charging a power bank any different from charging any other type of battery? Or if it does that, in other words, you don't need to optimize for that feature. Herman and Corin, let's talk about power banks for urban survival in today's podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. I'm Corn Poppleberry, coming to you from our home in Jerusalem. It is March 3rd, 2026, and I have to say, it is a bit of a heavy atmosphere in the city lately. As many of you following the news know, the tension across the region has been at a slow boil for months, and being here in the heart of it, you really feel that weight. We are keeping our focus on being prepared, staying informed, and making sure our community has the tools to navigate whatever comes next.
And I'm Herman Poppleberry. It is good to be here, Corn, though I wish the circumstances were a bit lighter. You are exactly right, the tension is palpable. With the ongoing situation regarding the northern borders and the broader regional challenges with Iran, we are seeing a shift in how people think about their daily safety. But that is exactly why we do this show. We have always said that knowledge is a form of resilience. When things feel unpredictable, having a solid technical understanding of your gear can be the difference between panic and a plan.
And speaking of being prepared and having a plan, our housemate Daniel sent us a voice note earlier today that really struck a chord. He has been thinking a lot about urban survival gear, specifically for those moments when you have to move fast. We are talking about the siren scrambles, where you have maybe 90 seconds to get to a shelter, or those situations where a temporary evacuation becomes necessary. He is looking at power banks, not those massive 50-pound power stations we have discussed for long-term home backup, but the stuff you can actually throw in a backpack or even a pocket and carry while you are on the move.
It is a fantastic topic and very timely. Daniel has been through the same rounds of sirens and scrambles as we have over the last year, so he knows the practical reality. When that alert goes off on your phone, you aren't grabbing a lithium iron phosphate battery the size of a microwave. You are grabbing your phone, your emergency kit, your documents, and hopefully a reliable way to keep your communication lines and lights alive for the next 12 to 24 hours. In an urban survival context, Portability is just as important as capacity.
Right. And Daniel pointed out something we see all the time, which is the absolute chaos of the power bank market in 2026. Even with better regulations, there are still so many brands making these wild, exaggerated claims about capacity and charging speed. He specifically mentioned a Baseus model he was looking at on a discount site, and he had some great questions about the technical side of things, specifically daisy chaining and pass-through charging. He wants to know if he can just link a bunch of smaller banks together to create a mega bank on the fly.
I am so glad he brought up Baseus. They are a massive player, and they have actually improved quite a bit recently, but there is still a lot to unpack regarding their marketing specs versus the physical reality of electrical engineering. I have actually been digging into some recent benchmarks on their latest 145-watt models and how they compare to what I consider the gold standards, like Anker, or even the more niche, rugged brands like Nitecore that are popular in the hiking and tactical communities.
Well, let's dive into the deep end. Because if you're in a situation where you might be away from a wall outlet for a day or two, and you are relying on that power bank for your GPS, your news updates, your Red Alert app, and your flashlight, you need to know exactly what it can and cannot do. You don't want to find out your 20,000 milliamp hour battery is actually a 10,000 milliamp hour battery when you are sitting in a dark shelter.
Let's start with the capacity confusion. This is the biggest hurdle for most consumers. You see a number like 20,000 milliamp hours or mAh printed in big bold letters on the side of a box. Most people think, okay, my iPhone 15 or 16 has a battery around 4,000 to 5,000 milliamp hours, so I should get 4 or 5 full charges. But as we have discussed in passing in previous episodes, like episode 773 on the evolution of USB-C, that is almost never the case. It is mathematically impossible due to the laws of thermodynamics and voltage conversion.
Right, because of the voltage difference. Most of these internal battery cells are rated based on their nominal voltage, which is usually 3.7 volts. But the USB standard for output is 5 volts, 9 volts, or even 20 to 28 volts for high-end laptops.
Precisely. When you convert that energy from the battery's internal 3.7 volts to the USB standard, you lose energy to heat. It is called conversion loss. Plus, the efficiency of the conversion circuit itself matters immensely. A high-quality power bank from a reputable brand might give you 80 to 85% of its rated capacity in actual usable energy. A cheap off-brand one might give you 60% or even less. So, when Daniel looks at that Baseus model and sees a tiny number like 12,000 milliamp hours listed in the fine print as rated capacity, he is seeing the honest truth of what the device can actually deliver at 5 volts.
It is so misleading for the average person who is just trying to stay safe. If you are looking for a rugged, high-speed device for urban survival, what is a realistic capacity you should be aiming for that still fits in a small go bag or a jacket pocket?
For a true go bag, I think the sweet spot is still the 20,000 milliamp hour range. There is a very specific reason for this. It is the maximum size that is universally allowed on airplanes without special permission, which is usually around 74 to 100 watt hours. It provides enough density to charge a modern smartphone 3 to 4 times fully. If you go up to the 27,000 milliamp hour models, you are hitting that legal limit of 100 watt hours. Those are great, but they start to get heavy. We are talking over a pound of weight. In a survival situation where you might be walking long distances or even running, weight is your absolute enemy.
That is a great point. If you are on foot, every ounce counts. We talked about that back in episode 8085 when we were looking at portable mesh networks. You want gear that is energy dense but not a literal brick. What about the brands though? Daniel mentioned Baseus, but where do you stand on the reliability of their hardware when things get rough? Are they Puppleberry approved for an emergency?
Baseus is decent for everyday office use or a casual flight, but for rugged urban survival in a conflict zone? I have some reservations. Their build quality is mostly thin plastic, and their thermal management can be hit or miss. If I am in a situation where my communication or my light depends on my gear, I am looking at Anker's Prime series. Anker has a much more robust track record with their Power IQ 4.0 technology and much better heat dissipation. Their internal sensors monitor temperature thousands of times per hour to prevent the battery from degrading or, worse, venting.
And what about Nitecore? I know you have been a fan of their tactical flashlights since we did episode 431. Do their power banks hold up to that same built-for-the-trenches standard?
Nitecore is actually the secret weapon for urban survival. They have a line called the NB series, specifically the NB 10,000 and the NB 20,000. These are reinforced with carbon fiber frames. They are incredibly light and very thin, but they are built to take a beating. They don't have the fancy OLED screens that the new Anker Prime units have, but in a survival situation, a screen is just one more thing that can crack or fail. I would take a rugged, simple Nitecore over a flashy, screen-heavy power bank any day if I'm heading to a bomb shelter. The NB 10,000 is so small it fits in a wallet pocket, yet it can charge a phone twice. That is the kind of engineering Daniel should be looking for.
Reliability over bells and whistles. I like that. But let's get into the speed aspect Daniel mentioned. He wants high-speed Type-C input and output. Why is that so critical in this context? Isn't slow and steady better for the battery?
Usually, yes, slow is better for the long-term health of the cells. But in a conflict zone or a disaster scenario, you have to think about the window of opportunity. You might only have 30 minutes of access to a working power outlet. Maybe you are at a community center, a hospital, or a friend's house who has a generator running. If your power bank only charges at 10 or 15 watts, it will take 10 hours to fill up. You don't have 10 hours. But with the new USB Power Delivery 3.1 standards, some of these banks, like the Anker 737, can take in 140 watts. You can go from 0 to 80% in about 35 minutes. That is a total game changer for someone on the move.
Right. So you can top off your entire reserve while you are grabbing a quick meal or checking in with family. That is a huge strategic advantage. But that brings up Daniel's other question about daisy chaining and pass-through charging. Let's define those for the listeners first, because they sound similar but are technically very different.
Sure. Pass-through charging is when you plug the power bank into the wall and then you plug your phone into the power bank. The power bank manages the incoming current to charge its own internal cells while simultaneously sending power out to your device. Daisy chaining is a bit more MacGyver, where you are basically connecting multiple power banks in a series. Bank A charges Bank B, which charges Bank C.
Daniel asked if charging one power bank from another is different from charging a standard battery. What is the technical reality there? Is it efficient?
It is very different, and honestly, it is generally a terrible idea unless you have absolutely no other choice. When you charge a power bank from another power bank, you are dealing with two sets of massive conversion losses. The first bank has to step up its internal voltage to 5 or 9 or 20 volts to send it out. Then, the second bank has to take that incoming voltage and step it back down to charge its internal cells. You are losing a massive amount of energy to heat in that process. You are basically wasting 25 to 30% of your total stored energy just to move it from one box to another.
So it is incredibly inefficient. It is like trying to fill a bucket by pouring water from another bucket, using a leaky funnel in the middle of a desert. You are losing the very thing you are trying to save.
And more importantly, most power banks are not designed to be charged by another power bank. There is a complex handshake process in USB power delivery where the two devices negotiate who is the source and who is the sink. Sometimes they get confused. You might plug bank A into bank B, and instead of A charging B, they just sit there in a logic loop. Or worse, bank B starts trying to charge bank A. It is a recipe for frustration when you are already in a high-stress situation.
I have actually seen that happen with some older USB-A to USB-C cables. It is infuriating. So, if Daniel wants to optimize this process, what features should he be looking for? Is there a way to make pass-through charging safer or more efficient?
The key is a high-quality battery management system, or BMS. A good BMS will prioritize the output. So if you are plugged into a wall outlet that is only giving you 30 watts, and your phone wants 20 watts, the BMS will send 20 watts directly to the phone and use the remaining 10 watts to slowly trickle charge the power bank's internal cells. Cheaper power banks, like some of the entry-level Baseus or generic white label brands, often cannot do this. They will either shut off the output entirely while they are charging, or they will overheat because they are trying to manage two high current flows at once.
Heat seems to be the recurring theme here, especially in a place like Israel, where it is already hot for a good portion of the year. If you are in a crowded shelter or you have your gear packed tight in a tactical bag, that heat has nowhere to go.
That is why I am very cautious about pass-through charging in a survival context. Heat is the #1 killer of lithium-ion cells. If you are constantly using pass-through, you are keeping those cells at a high temperature for a long time, which degrades their lifespan and can even lead to swelling. In an emergency, sure, do what you have to do to keep your phone alive. But as a regular practice, it is much better to charge them separately.
Let's talk about the specific models again. If you had to build a Puppleberry-approved kit for Daniel right now, given what we know about the situation in the north and the potential for long-term power outages if the grid takes a hit, what does that setup look like?
I would go with the two-tier approach. First, I would have a base camp bank. For this, I recommend the Anker Prime 27650 mAh power bank. It supports 250 watts of total output and can be recharged at 140 watts. It has a beautiful display that tells you exactly how much time is left until it's empty or full. It is a bit bulky, but for your main power reserve in a backpack, it is incredible. Then, for the actual pocket or scout bag, I would have the Nitecore NB10000 Gen 3. It is made of carbon fiber, weighs only 5.3 ounces, and is IPX5 rated for water resistance. It is so light you will forget you are carrying it, but it gives you that 1 or 2 extra full charges when you are literally on the run.
I like that strategy. A heavy hitter for the bag and a scout for the pocket. What about cables, though? We see people spend $100 on a high-end power bank and then use a $2 gas station cable they found in a drawer. That has to be a bottleneck, right?
Oh, it is a recipe for disaster, Corn. If you are using a cable that isn't rated for the wattage your power bank can output, you are creating a dangerous bottleneck. For those high-speed Anker or Baseus units, you need a cable rated for 100 watts or even 240 watts that includes an E-marker chip. Without that chip, the devices won't negotiate the higher speeds. You will be stuck at 60 watts or less, even if your power bank is capable of way more.
It is those little details that trip people up. It is like having a high-performance sports car and putting wooden wheels on it. It just doesn't make sense.
And, in a survival situation, a cable failure is a gear failure. I recommend getting braided, reinforced cables. Anker's Flow series is very flexible and durable, but for true ruggedness, look at companies like Nomad or even some of the industrial-grade cables from StarTech. You want something that can be stepped on, tangled in a zipper, and shoved into a bag 1,000 times without the internal wiring fraying. I also suggest carrying at least one short 6-inch cable. Long cables have more resistance and are just more likely to get snagged when you are moving fast.
You know, thinking about the broader context Daniel mentioned, the conflict with Iran and the constant threat of escalation, there is a certain peace of mind that comes from knowing your gear is top tier. We have talked before about the importance of the American and Israeli technological edge. Using gear that is engineered with high safety standards and reliable components isn't just about convenience. It is about making sure your link to the world stays open when the sirens are going off.
It really is. When you are looking for news reports or waiting for an all-clear signal from the home front command, your phone is your lifeline. If your power bank fails because of a cheap capacitor or poor soldering on a circuit board, that is a serious problem. That is why I tend to steer people toward established brands with high engineering standards. Even if the cells are manufactured in the same factories as the cheap stuff, the quality control and the engineering behind the BMS in an Anker or a Nitecore is just leagues ahead of the generic stuff you find on discount sites.
Let's touch on something Daniel mentioned about the exaggerated capacity claims. We have all seen those power banks on certain websites that claim to have 100,000 or even 500,000 milliamp hours in a device the size of a sandwich. How do we explain to listeners why that is physically impossible in 2026?
It is all about energy density. Right now, with current lithium-ion and lithium polymer technology, there is a hard physical limit to how much energy you can pack into a specific volume. A 20,000 milliamp hour battery is going to weigh about 1 pound or 450 grams. If you see something claiming 5 times that capacity but it weighs the same, it is a blatant lie. Usually, these scam banks are using low-quality recycled cells or even filling part of the case with sand or iron weights to make it feel substantial. It is predatory, especially when sold to people who are genuinely worried about their safety.
It is disgusting, honestly, taking advantage of people's fears with fake specs. That is why we always say, look at the watt-hour rating. It is a much more accurate measure of total energy than milliamp hours.
Yes, watt-hours is the gold standard. If you multiply the milliamp hours by the nominal voltage, usually 3.7, and divide by 1,000, you get the watt-hours. For most power banks, if that number isn't clearly printed on the device, it is a massive red flag. International airlines require the watt-hour rating to be visible for safety inspections. If it is not there, it is likely not a high-quality product and might not even be safe to have in your home.
So for Daniel, checking those labels and sticking to the reputable brands is step one. But what about the long-term storage of these devices? If he has these in a go bag that sits by the door for 3 months without being used, what does the maintenance look like? Does the battery just die over time?
This is a crucial point for anyone prepping for emergencies. Lithium-ion batteries do not like to sit at 100% or 0% for long periods. If you are prepping, the temptation is to keep them at 100% so they are ready to go, but that actually degrades the chemistry and causes the battery to lose capacity over time. The ideal storage charge is around 60 to 70%. I recommend Daniel check his gear once a month. Discharge it a bit by charging a phone, then top it back up to that 70% mark. If he knows a storm is coming or there is a specific security escalation in the news, then he can top it off to 100%.
That is a great practical tip. It is like a car battery. You can't just let it sit forever and expect it to crank perfectly when you need it. You need to exercise the cells occasionally to keep the ions moving.
And keep them out of the heat. Don't leave your go bag in a car in the Jerusalem sun. That will kill the capacity faster than almost anything else. Heat causes the electrolyte to break down, which can lead to the battery puffing or swelling. If you ever see a power bank that looks like it is bulging or the case is splitting, stop using it immediately. It is a fire hazard.
Now, I want to go back to the daisy chaining question because I think there is a nuance we might have missed. Daniel asked if there is a specific feature to optimize that process. Is there any scenario where it actually makes sense? For example, if you have a portable solar panel that only has one output, but you have 3 power banks to charge.
In that case, you aren't really daisy chaining power banks, you are using a hub. But if you are talking about plugging one bank into another, the only way it is even remotely optimized is if both banks support the latest USB power delivery EPR or extended power range standards. But again, you are still losing energy. A much better way to chain them is to use a high wattage GaN charger, which we covered in episode 896. A good 65 or 100 watt GaN charger with 3 or 4 USB-C ports can charge all your power banks simultaneously from a single wall outlet or portable generator. That is 10 times more efficient than trying to link them together.
Gallium nitride technology has really changed the game for us. Being able to carry a tiny brick that can output 100 watts to 3 different devices is a huge space saver in a survival kit. It replaces 3 or 4 old-fashioned heavy chargers.
It really has. Between GaN chargers and high-capacity, high-speed power banks, we are in a golden age of portable power. But it requires a bit of technical literacy to navigate. You can't just buy the cheapest thing on the shelf and hope for the best when the power goes out. You need to understand the relationship between the charger, the cable, and the battery.
So, to summarize for Daniel and for everyone listening, focus on reputable brands like Anker and Nitecore for the best reliability and safety. Look for high-speed Type-C input and output, at least 30 watts, but ideally 65 or more, to maximize your charging windows. Don't fall for the massive capacity claims if the weight doesn't match the physics. And avoid daisy chaining unless it is an absolute last resort, because you are just wasting precious energy.
Perfectly stated, corn. And I would add, invest in at least one rugged carbon fiber or reinforced model like the Nitecore for your actual person. The fancy stuff with the screen stays in the bag. The rugged stuff stays in your pocket where it might get bumped or dropped. Also, consider a small Faraday bag or a waterproof pouch for your power bank. If you are out in the rain or near a burst pipe, water is the second biggest enemy after heat.
That is solid advice. You know, it is interesting how these technical details become so vital in the context of what we are living through here in Israel. It is not just about gadgets. It is about maintaining a sense of control and preparedness in an unpredictable environment. When you know your gear works, you feel more capable.
It is the architecture of resilience, Corn. We talked about the psychology of survival in episode 891, and having reliable tools is a huge part of that. It reduces the friction of an emergency. If you know your phone will stay charged and your flashlight will work, that is one less thing for your brain to worry about. That leaves you more mental bandwidth to make important decisions for your family, like where to go or how to help a neighbor.
I couldn't agree more. And I think Daniel's approach of continuous improvement is exactly the right mindset. Every time we face one of these situations, we learn something new about our gear and our own reactions. We refine the kit, we refine the plan, and we get better. It is a process of constant iteration.
It is the only way to live in this part of the world honestly. You have to be proactive. You can't just wait for things to happen and then react with whatever is lying around. You have to have the systems in place beforehand. That includes having your power banks charged to 70%, your cables organized, and your go bag ready by the door.
Well, I think we have given Daniel a lot to chew on. I am actually curious to see which model he ends up going with. Maybe we can get an update from him in a few weeks once he has put some of this gear through its paces in his own testing. He is pretty thorough with his stress tests.
I would love to hear his feedback, especially on that Baseus model if he decides to get it as a backup. If it actually delivers the speeds it claims without thermal throttling, that would be a good data point for our listeners who are on a tighter budget.
Definitely. Well, before we wrap up, I want to take a second to talk to our listeners. We have been doing this for over 900 episodes now, and the community that has grown around my weird prompts is truly incredible. We get so much great feedback and so many thoughtful questions from you all, whether it is about power banks, emergency food, or digital privacy.
We really do. It is what keeps us going, especially during the more challenging weeks here in Jerusalem. If you have been enjoying the show and you find these deep dives helpful, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a quick review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people find the show and helps us grow this community of prepared and informed individuals.
Yeah, a simple rating or a couple of sentences means a lot to us. And remember, you can find our entire archive of 905 episodes at myweirdprompts.com. There is a search bar there, so if you want to find those older episodes we mentioned, like the one on USB-C standards or emergency lighting, just head over there. We have everything categorized by topic.
We also have a contact form on the website if you have your own weird prompts or technical questions you want us to tackle. We love hearing from you, whether you are here in Israel, in the States, or anywhere else in the world. Your questions often lead us down research paths we wouldn't have discovered otherwise.
Well, Herman, any final thoughts on the power bank situation before we sign off for the day?
Just one. Gear is great, but training is better. Practice with your gear. Know how long it takes to charge your phone from your specific power bank. Know how long it takes to charge the bank itself from your wall charger. Don't let the first time you use it be in the middle of a blackout or a siren. Do a dry run this weekend. Turn off your phone's wall charger and live off your power bank for a day. You will learn more from that experience than from any spec sheet.
Words to live by. Train like you fight, as they say. All right, this has been My Weird Prompts. I'm Corn Poppleberry.
And I'm Herman Poppleberry. Thanks for joining us, and stay safe out there, everyone.
We'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.
Take care, everyone.
And thanks again to Daniel for the prompt. It was a good one.
Definitely. Talk soon.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts.